It is a real honor and pleasure to be able to welcome you here for the Think7 Summit in Berlin and to bring together the expertise of the G7, the G20 and beyond community, the community within the think tank as well as research environment. We will look into the multiple crises that our world is going through. How do we end the pandemic? How do we reflect on a geopolitical order that is shattered at the moment?
Definitely discuss about the impact of G7 and G20 on youth. And we know youth are like the future generation, so it's definitely important to have youth on the board.
We are expecting from the G7 summit that the G7 heads and states of government are going to come together to find good, actionable solutions. And to do so, the engagement process is really important, and the Think7 is one of these engagement groups, because in that community, the G7 community, we have developed actionable and timely solution together with representatives, academics, researchers from all G7 countries and the European Union. The Deutsches Institut Germany is really happy to be partner of the Think7 summit, and I wish us all a very productive summit.
It is an honor to come together in person and be able to face these multiple crises together with you up front.
This is turning out to be an extremely important G7 summit. The reason is that we are coming into a new world order, and what the definition of this world order is now being decided. And to be involved in these decisions, there is a broad understanding that we should not define this as the West versus the rest, or the rich versus the poor, or the North versus the South, but rather have a much finer division between those who observe the rule of law and those who don't, those who are willing to constrain their power for the public good and those who are not willing to do so. And that, I believe, would be terribly important for the future of this world geopolitically and for the planet as a whole.
I'm very excited to be here. I will be moderating a high-level plenary session this morning on how to promote a cooperative world order in times of war. And I think this is what I expect from this Think7 summit, that we have more cooperation on global pressing issues like trade, like open value chains, like climate change and energy transition. And I think we have a very difficult geopolitical situation right now with Russia's aggression against the Ukraine. And any type of dialogue helps that furthers cooperation on these global issues.
I think what the sessions this morning have shown is that the problems that the G7 are facing are global problems, and that some of the most important consequences of the Russian invasion of Ukraine fall upon non-G7 countries and cause some great hardships in the developing world. And so part of the task, or really the need of the G7, is to take into account the global consequences of these actions, of the invasion, the energy and food crisis, the health crisis, and try to lead in a global effort to address these problems.
The Think7 Summit today and tomorrow here in Berlin is the absolute highlight of our Think7 process. The process had started already in January with our Inception conference. Since then, more than 200 researchers have worked to produce 70 policy briefs and issue papers to produce research-based policy recommendations for the G7. And the Think7 Summit is a great opportunity to bring everyone together, government representatives, academics, civil society representatives, to discuss the key policy recommendations of the Think7 task forces that they give towards the G7.
So one of the key topics we've discussed yesterday and today at the Think7 Summit here in Berlin are the relationships between Africa and the G7, because there's a long-standing tradition for the G7 to put topics that are of relevance for Africa high on the agenda. And obviously this year the African countries are facing multiple crises. They are still struggling with the repercussions of the COVID-19 pandemic. And now they are struggling with a triple crisis as a result of the war in Ukraine with regard to food, access to food and food prices, with regard to still the health crisis, and now also a mounting debt crisis. And but interestingly, at the discussions today at the Think7 Summit, also involving experts from Africa, from the continent, we learned that there are many initiatives underway on the continent, like the African Free Trade Area and other initiatives on the continent, that show that there are a lot of ideas among African countries how to solve African problems, and that was very encouraging. And I think one of the key initiatives for the G7 is to support those continental strategies.
Multiple crises that we are facing, either the war and conflict, the pandemic, or the climate crisis, are not going to be solved if we do not include an intersectional, just and equitable approach. And that means listening, and not only listening, but integrating the different voices of those communities that are in the front lines of those discussions. We need systemic changes, and that include a change in our behavior, in our narrative, shifting for neo-colonial practices to a real and true change. Thanks.
So it's wonderful that so many states are adopting a feminist foreign policy, and I really welcome that. But I would want to encourage them to go further and to go well beyond issues of representation and having more elite women at the tables. I think we need to ask really fundamental questions about foreign policy and domestic policy right across the board. We really need to be looking at things like who benefits from these policies, who is made more secure or less secure, and how can we change some really deep structural things, really fundamental aspects of policy to make the world a more equal place.
We need to continue having discussions on how to tackle structural inequalities with transformative approaches, with intersectional approaches, and with human rights-based approaches in foreign and development policies. So we need feminist foreign policies, and we don't only need discussions, but we need to start implementing and acting now.
Our task force on global health took a very special approach. We decided that we could not discuss global health without voices from the Global South. And so first of all, we invited a co-chair from the Global South, and we discussed our recommendations with colleagues from the Global South at a meeting with 160 participants. That was absolutely central for our work because we feel that multilateralism is critical, as the G7 says, but that multilateralism, particularly in health, also needs to be inclusive. This is why we also recommend to firmly support the World Health Organization as the inclusive global health organization, and we make the suggestion that we have to address the fragmentation in global health. We've suggested a number of mechanisms to do that, to bring agencies together who should be working together, to bring organizations in a common direction, and that means in particular to finance global public goods. We feel the G7, as a group of the richest countries in the world, as the most important donors, have a very special responsibility to take such a global public goods agenda forward and to make sure that those common resources that we need are available. Pandemic preparedness is one example, but there of course are others like research, like universal health coverage, and issues around women's rights, for example. And we hope very much that many professionals and policymakers will make use of this fantastic resource.
We at FES were absolutely delighted to open our doors to so many thinkers from around the globe for the G7 Summit at the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung in Berlin. For me, the sessions that were most exciting really combined the local view with a global view. It combined the inside view from G7 countries with the outside view from Asia, from Africa, from around the globe. For example, I moderated the session on supporting democracy, where we looked in particular at the nexus between political inequality and economic inequality, and what needs to be done in our democracies to make them attractive again for everyone. Not only for the rich, not only for academics, but for the young, for people who are unemployed, for people who really want to shape democracies within their daily lives and within their communities. We looked at that from Europe, and we looked at that from the South African perspective and discussed in detail what G7 countries can do to support democracies within their own countries and around the globe. I think what is going to be really exciting to see at the G7 summit at the end of June is how G7 countries pick up this agenda to look at structural changes that are so much needed to address global inequality, but also to strengthen a multilateral order that is more democratic.